Hey there, listeners. This is Terry Cowley, your host of the R.M.Williams Outback podcast. Thanks so much for being here and welcome to Season 3. Natalie Egleton has been the CEO of the Foundation for Rural and Regional Renewal for the past 9 years. The FRRR is the only national foundation specifically focused on ensuring social and economic strength in remote, rural and regional Australia. There's a lot the FRRR does to try to achieve this, and we will talk to Natalie about this, of course. But one of the key supports the organisation offers is in disaster recovery. So you won't be surprised to hear a lot of recent work has been undertaken in relation to the massive flooding in inland Australia. Natalie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We might start with a state of play from where you sit about where we are with the floods right now and what you're doing in that space before arcing back to the work of the FRRR generally. So where are we at with the flood recovery from where you sit?
Of course, there's many floods now. It's been a pretty remarkable flood. Season's probably not quite the right word, but a period of time this year where we've seen flooding impact vast regions, particularly across Queensland and New South Wales. And from our perspective, the effects are going to be really long-lasting. The scale of them, the impact to agriculture, to livelihoods in particularly those outback areas, the amount of time that roads have been closed for and the inability for freight routes and travel routes. We're hearing about tourism impacts where, we would have had a lot of nomads and travellers coming through a lot of these regions. So the impacts are pretty far ranging. And of course, there's the individual impacts on people as they just try to get to grips with cleaning up, restoring infrastructure like fencing and dealing with the heartache of all of the stock losses, which will have many ripple effects in many different ways in communities out there. And of course, we've had really major floods affecting the mid-north coast region of New South Wales in the last week as well, which came very quickly and, has had really devastating impacts. So the water's just receding there. We've had partnerships and supported many of those communities over many years as well. So we're currently taking stock of all of the funding that we've provided over the last 5 or so years across those Western Queensland areas as well as the mid-north coast. And there's hundreds of grants that we've provided to those communities over that time that are in various states of play. So our approach is we've reached out to all of those that we can just to say, we are here. Please don't stress about whatever's going on with that project that we've provided funding for. Take your time. If it needs to change, let us know. If you need to use the money for something else, let us know. If you just need to, take stock and not even thinking about that, that's fine too. So our approach has just been to let them know we're here, that we're open and flexible, for them to let us know how we can help at this early stage. FRRR's approach to supporting community disaster recovery has for a long time now been focused on the medium to long term. So in these early stages, we tend to do what I've just described, let communities know we're here and that we will be here for the long haul, but allow those early, both emergency services and relief organisations to do the great work they do in helping communities get back on their feet just in those very, early clean-up stages. And then as things settle, as needs start to emerge and as the other supports start to wind down, it becomes clearer to us what that long-term need will be and clearer to the communities as well. So that tends to be when our support will kick in earnest, I suppose.
Is it your experience that disaster recovery can take years really, can't it?
I started with FRRR as a program manager for the recovery of the 2009 Victorian Black Saturday bushfires. That grant program ran for almost a decade. We were supporting those communities for a really long time. The needs evolve, the focus of funding changes, different parts of the community need different types of support as time goes on. And it's really important for support that's flexible to be there along that time frame. So I would argue that it can realistically take up to a decade for a new normal to emerge for communities that have had a really catastrophic disaster like the ones we've seen in Queensland and the mid-north coast. I think we can't underestimate just how much structural impact there is to the economy, to community wellbeing, to local service systems, to volunteerism, to people's wellbeing, which, in those early year or two, often the energy is going into rebuilding and getting everyone back on their feet. And that's really time consuming and energy consuming. And what we have heard is that when that kind of stops and in theory the recovery's done, the recovery from the recovery begins. And there's a new form of recovery, which is a coming to grips with new normal, with what the future looks like and processing, really processing what's happened, because the busyness of the cleanup and the relief and the early recovery has kind of finished. And then you take stock after that. So that recovering from the recovery has been a sort of experience that I've really seen many, many times now with communities as they recover.
I would imagine that could take really, different forms. It might be something obvious like mental health services, but it could be something like an art project even, couldn't it? Or building a community hall. Or...
and those rebuilding and regenerating projects are recovery, the recovery supports in themselves, as well as doing things that need to be done to get a town or a community back on its feet. Art projects are just an amazing way for communities to both process what's happened, to create conversations, talk about things or not talk about things, but use creative avenues to communicate and process trauma and grief, especially children, young people, more vulnerable people, First Nations communities. There's a real power in the arts. Community infrastructure is often, we provide a lot of funding for very small community infrastructure. It might be refitting the kitchen in a hall, or it might be kitting it out as an evacuation centre because they realised, they suddenly hosted 100 or more people and they weren't really ready for it. And that process also can be really empowering, during the recovery, where you've had an experience where you have had no power or control, where something's happening that you're just reacting to be able to then invest back into your community with things that will make you more ready next time is a really important thing that many communities seek to do as well. So you're right, it can be really, the things that communities do are really diverse and they all make a big difference, both in the immediate, just getting things back on track, but also in that healing and getting ready for the future.
Disaster has a way of shining a light on existing issues. That would refer to infrastructure, would be one example of that, wouldn't it? But also social issues too.
Yeah, and we'll often see, things like floods, the areas that are sometimes most impacted, especially more populated areas, are the lower lying areas. They tend to be lower socioeconomic housing, for example, or rental accommodation that are not as prepared to withstand a flood. And so you can see that sort of exacerbation of people who are already experiencing hardship being placed into risk or a more vulnerable position and experiencing more hardship. In rural and outback and remote areas, the investment in structural things like telecommunications, digital connectivity, roads, those things show up in disasters. We can't get messages to people. We can't transport people. All the roads are not fit to sustain a major disaster or a flood. And so that kind of structural inequity of our outback communities and the investment in them shows up whenever there's a disaster. And we do see reactive fixes afterwards. And in the outback Queensland floods, that was something that came up. The digital infrastructure just wasn't there to support people to know what was coming.
I'm guessing one of the reasons why the FRRR would exist is because disasters in remote areas, remote, rural, regional, are different, aren't they?
Yeah, I think the public attention is peaked when there's a large population affected. So when we see things like, and this is not to suggest that there's any lesser need or warranted attention, but when a major city experiences a risk or a major flood, and we saw it with Cyclone Alfred, and, there's a huge amount of investment in getting ready for that. Outback communities don't get that. Outback and rural areas experience disasters really frequently. And they experience lots of different disruptions. Everyone talks about the resilience of rural communities, and I think we're very tired of, being described that way in general. But the reality is you have to be able to deal with things with a fair degree of autonomy. You have to be able to cope with extreme events on a pretty regular basis, whether it's a major storm, whether it's a flood, whether it's a fire. There's so many events that go unnoticed in rural and remote areas that communities just get on with and deal with.
The news cycle moves on very quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah. So when something catastrophic happens, rural communities are amazing at mobilising and getting organised. They know where things are. They know how to make things happen. They know how to get supplies in. They're often just limited by access points or by infrastructure that can enable that. And I think what we kind of need in rural areas is more enabling support rather than being rescued when things happen, or because the these things just happen so frequently. Just having better equipped local community groups like our local volunteer brigades, etc. We receive so many funding requests for really basic equipment that is life-saving for these remote communities that are in there. Whether it's a backup battery, a backup generator, backup radio system for the fire truck. These are things that are really simple and should be available for them, and they have to go and raise money for them. And they're largely on their own, when something happens. And so they need to be equipped and they need to be resourced. So we're pretty passionate about that, and we think that we know that that's a difference in rural and outback areas. They really have to work hard just to get the basics, and we don't think that's fair. And we're pretty passionate about helping that to be a different story.
So I think the figures I have, projects supported have totaled around 177 million by the FRRR, 14,000 plus projects.
Oh, it's gone up since then. It's more like 200 million.
Probably has, yes. Okay. And of course, natural disaster is just one part of it. And you do a lot to support the wellbeing of communities generally. I think I saw it described as real world problem solving, and it's very targeted investment, and that this is sort of one of the things that makes FRRR different. Can you expand on that a little?
I mean, FRRR is in and of rural Australia. It was formed to serve rural Australia, to fill a need that wasn't being met anywhere else, to be available to rural and remote communities to drive their agendas and to enable them to be really the vibrant places that they are, can be and should be. That's everything to us. We have our feet firmly on the ground. We're really passionate about employing rural people. Our staff are based all over rural and remote Australia. We spend as much time as we can on the ground in conversation, really sense checking and just making sure that the money that we are then going and raising from our partners and then redistributing to rural communities is absolutely grounded in what communities are saying they need and what's going to be most useful to help them. And so we take a huge amount of pride of being grounded in real world problem solving and really listening to communities and trying to play a translator role as well back to our funding partners and governments around what that looks like. And sometimes it's just really unsexy stuff. In fact, often it's very unsexy stuff, and it's really hard to get philanthropy interested in that stuff. Very hard to get, businesses interested in those things, but that's what communities are just needing often. It's either resourcing for some of those critical infrastructure and equipment things that help them to keep their communities well and safe and thriving, or it's investment in people quite often, investment in resourcing, capability, getting local leaders skilled up, because it's really hard to access that from those places in a way that's relevant as well, and that you don't have to travel to the city and kind of do all the hard yards. So for us, that's the approach we take first, is very community-led, community-based and community-driven.
You've got a specific area for climate solutions, which I thought was interesting.
We do. That's a fairly new portfolio. It probably emerged through our disaster recovery and preparedness work, and clearly the last 5 or so years of disaster events, including drought, which I'm a Victorian and we're very, very in drought at the moment. I haven't seen much rain for a very long time. These are climate impacts. They're not just episodic events that happen every 5 years. We're having major events on an ongoing cumulative basis. And so from a community perspective, we were hearing lots of things about how rural communities wanted to respond to this changing climate. Some of it was about energy security and energy independence, places that when a disaster does happen or a storm happens, they've got no power for days or weeks. How can they be better prepared for that and not rely on diesel generators for the whole thing, for example, or water security or energy literacy and climate literacy, so that people can understand what's actually happening and how they can prepare their households more, prepare their properties. And there are intersections with land use, agriculture, renewable energy, and we were unsurprisingly hearing a lot of conflicting information, a lot of confusion, a lot of anxiety in rural areas about this whole sort of climate transition happening to them and around them, and feeling pretty disempowered by that. So we essentially initiated a grant program that would provide funding for communities to take some agency in whatever way and shape that might be. And we've been funding things that are all of the things I've just described. Some really great remote First Nations communities setting up their own energy system, for example, so that they can produce their own electricity for the whole community, which addresses a whole range of issues around, affordability, wellbeing, access to clean water, all of the things that we need kind of electricity to power, through to, workshops in small towns just to understand what it might mean to put solar on some of their community facilities and would it help them economically and environmentally, through to, school projects and communities looking at doing renewables. So it's a really interesting program and it gets a lot of take up. And I think the premise and the principle that we always start with, as I said earlier, is community led. And so it's really broad and it is enabling communities to kind of just step into this environment of, what is essentially extreme climate events back to back, with some control and agency and sort of skilling up.
Okay. It's about more than money, I'm sure you would agree.
Yeah, the money is certainly the thing. Can't walk into a town with my job without a dollar sign on my head. And that's great because it's a good conversation starter.
Might make you a very popular lady in some situations.
It does. You definitely get some special treatment, which is completely unwarranted because, it's not my money. We always say the money's the enabler, right? It's the thing that enables, but ultimately that's just a tool. And of course we can't do a lot of things without it, but our role at FRRR is far more than money. It is about relationships. It is about understanding the stories of rural and remote communities, the lived experiences, the realities of how policies or funding programs or services are working or not working in many cases, and about the role that we can have in helping to influence change about those and amplifying the voices of communities that are very invisible to much of the nation and largely unheard and not really respected, I would say. Not to suggest we're kind of changing the world, but we're certainly working at it. And I would say our perspectives are highly valued, particularly in the policy-making landscape and the philanthropy landscape. And it's those very grounded, hyperlocal perspectives that really need to be heard. And when they are, we see some different things happen. So we're really proud of that role. And I guess the other part is our team are always on hand. They spend a huge amount of time just on the phone with community groups, community leaders, throwing around ideas for projects that they might have, helping them to navigate just how to write a grant application. We have, I can't remember what the percentage is, but a really high percentage of our applicants have never applied for a grant before until they come to us. So we think of ourselves as a bit of a soft landing place and a bit of a hand holder.
Must be really satisfying to help people who haven't been helped before.
Amazing. Yeah, just that confidence build to say, yes, your idea is worthwhile. We want to back it. We trust that you're learning and that's okay, and that you're doing something really important for your community that is worthwhile. And that alone, like half the time, it's not even about the money. It's about that. It's about that being seen and heard, and having something backed by someone outside your community just gives such a huge amount of confidence and such a huge amount of momentum. And we do have people who, write beautiful letters to us or, are in tears when they receive the call. That's definitely the best part of our job is giving those calls. And then there's a fair share that don't get through the first time, but our team will work with them and give them some feedback and advice, and they'll come through again and they'll get that grant the second or third time. And that is when it's really satisfying, because you can see how hard they've worked and just how much they've taken on the learning and how far they've come. And you often just see them take off. You just see them get some wind behind them and they're on to the next thing. And sometimes they'll then go and apply for other grants and have success as well, which is great because it means they can go off and find other opportunities as well beyond us.
So you've had a long career, a 25-year career in the non-profit and philanthropic sector, been working in fundraising and partnerships and organisation development roles, and I understand you're really passionate about, well, I can hear that you're really passionate about facilitating, enduring responses to issues facing rural communities. So what would you say are those big issues right at the moment, putting disaster to the side?
I think for rural Australia, we are facing into a big generational transition. You would know all our rural towns are driven by volunteer community groups who are led by committees who are getting older and want to step back. And we're not quite sure where the next generation is. In some cases, they're absolutely stepping up. But largely what we are hearing many, many communities grapple with is, what does leading our communities look like for the next generation? The time availability, the use of technology, there's so many different dimensions now than there were when my generation and others before me that, you'd sign up for a committee and you go to your monthly committee meetings and you do your events and your fundraisers and all the things that you do. It looks really different for the next generation. And so there's a real question about how we sustain the community effort of our towns, which is so much about our vibrancy and our connectedness, but it's also about how we keep services going, how we raise money for our facilities, how we keep our emergency services going. These are lifeblood and they're real practical things because rural towns don't have the services, that it's often volunteers that keep things going or do the advocacy as well. So the generational transition is probably almost the top issue that's kind of coming to the top of everything.
Just on that, what are you hearing about why that next wave isn't coming through?
Some of the anecdote that I've been hearing about is that it's not appealing. The way it looks at the moment is not appealing. It looks like a lifetime kind of sentence to being a treasurer or something, which people just don't have the time or the inclination for. There's a bit of the old guard holding on, like how do you actually empower the next? I've heard some lovely descriptions around we need to do more than just invite them to the table. We need to set a new table. And that's really hard to do. There's a different leadership kind of mindset there about things are going to change. It's not going to be done the way that it's being done. That's really hard to let go of. Some things won't be done anymore. So there's a bit of a mindset and change piece. And then there's just the population and people. A lot of small towns have got smaller populations. They don't have the same kind of profile necessarily that they used to. So it's just a different. So, I think some of the solutions are about looking outside your community and using digital because you can actually have people coming in from lots of places to contribute. My husband's on a board and one of their board members who is moving back here soon, but has been overseas for the past year, dialing into their board meetings from overseas as a local community committee. So I think we need to sort of open up our minds and leverage the sort of the new contemporary ways that we can get involved and contribute.
Can you possibly give me an example of a project that has been addressing some of those issues that you've funded?
Yeah, I'd say there's a bit of experimenting going on out there, which is great. We funded a project in Queensland up around the Gladstone region where they are trying to innovate the not-for-profit governance sort of model and looking at different ways that committees can be resourced. So not necessarily going with every organisation needs to have a committee, but thinking a bit more innovatively about shared services and ways of sharing resources. So things like that, that's sort of more about efficiency and really thinking smartly about who you've got access to and what you do with them. And then, we've been running some long-term place-based initiatives in New South Wales, which are around not-for-profit sector capacity building. Just a bit of a mouthful. And some of those communities have just been trying to open up, I guess. They've been holding volunteer expos and connecting in with schools. So we partnered with the local high school in one of those communities to do a youth roadmap where young people designed solutions for their community. And a lot of that was around things they wanted to be involved with. And they were practical things for them like transport, jobs, how they plug into the business community. We started that consultation process by going to the local pool during a swimming carnival. We worked with the school to make sure, obviously, that was all okay. But we went to them, we took food, and we asked them what they wanted to see and what the future would look like for them in their community as leaders. And they came up with incredible things. And then, the local business community came along and just different conversations started and different doors started opening.
So I guess it always does really come back to those grassroots solutions, not imposing solutions on a community. It can be challenging, can't it? Because if you have those conversations, you would hope to see trends, but sometimes it's like so many different things that different people want. It can be challenging at times to try and deliver something that people can be unified about.
That's where you do just have to go with community-led processes and allow local communities to work out what's going to be relevant for them, which is, as you say, it'll be potentially lots of different things. When we provide funding, we are always looking for where the buy-in is coming from for the idea in the community. Is this something that's just got a few people around it, or is there actually some really good engagement in the idea? And it might be from the schools, from the business community, from the art groups or the recreation facilities, whatever it might be, because that really gives you a picture of how hard they've been working to build a common picture. And it might have lots of different objectives and there might be different aspirations or agendas, but they're working towards the same kind of goal for the town. And that's what we want to see. Like, where's the vision for the town, and how's everyone kind of working together using their relative strengths and talents, which every town's got. but it's hard to do that work. So we do provide a fair bit of support to help that coordination and collaboration, because it takes time. It's hard work.
Okay. So you live in regional Victoria yourself,
Yeah.
and the headquarters of FRRR is in, I guess you'd call Bendigo Regional Victoria, wouldn't you?
Yes.
And I think a lot of your staff works from home at different times, and a lot of them are women. Why do you think that is?
We've now got a grand total of 4 men.
Out of how many?
Out of about 40. So we're getting a little bit better on that front. I mean, I think philanthropy generally and community development often attracts women, but I'd also suggest that FRRR is a really flexible workplace, and being able to work from home. A lot of our roles are part-time or, can be worked in pretty flexible ways. So I think that works for a lot of rural women. We're in the caring industry, and we are doing work that is not that men are not great at that, but generally I think the stats would say that women are more represented in caring industries. Yeah, and philanthropy in general has a pretty high percentage of females in the workforce, which is excellent, and particularly in executive level roles as well, which is great to see. Yeah, so it is not a design thing to have so many women, but I think I always say this with the caveat that men are absolutely playing incredible roles in rural communities, but the women are often the unsung powerhouse behind many things that happen in rural towns, and are juggling it amongst lots of competing priorities. And so I think it's something that we should be celebrating, and the role that women have in giving is just a bit underrated generally. And I think that would be reflective of FRRR's workforce as well. There's a real resonance with just the rolling up your sleeves and getting stuff done and making a difference.
So we might sum up. FRRR is celebrating 25 years this year with the slogan, Local Solutions, Lasting Impact. I like that slogan. Congratulations to the organisation and the difference that you all do make to rural, regional and remote Australia. And I should also say that the work of FRRR is highlighted in a story about the flood recovery in issue 162 of Outback Magazine by Kirsty McKenzie. So grab a hold of that. And of course, you can get that on our website, outbackmag.com.au, or in newsagents. You have a disaster recovery appeal happening at the moment. So maybe if you can tell people if they'd like to donate to that, how they do that, and also if they're in a community that they think could benefit from an FRRR grant, how they do that.
Yes, our work is only possible because of the donations that we receive. So we do have an appeal running to support the recovery of the flood-affected communities. People can give to either our endowment fund, which means that it's invested and the earnings are then distributed long-term to support communities in their recovery and preparedness long-term, the Disaster Recovery and Resilience Fund, or they can make a general donation to the appeal, which goes into our open grants program, which will distribute grants on a quarterly basis to communities for their priorities over the long term of the recovery.
Is it frrr.org.au, the website?
It is. Yeah, frrr.org.au, and the appeal is on the landing page there. And if there are community groups who are wanting some support or just wanting to chat to us about ways that they could get their project off the ground, we've got a 1-800 free call number, or they can send us an email. So there's always someone available on Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, Victorian time or Eastern Standard Time. And those details are also on our website. We have grant programs on the go all the time, so very keen to chat to anyone.
Natalie, what is that free call number for people who might be interested in learning more about the grants?
It's 1-800 170 020.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Natalie. I know you're very busy with all this work, so your time is much appreciated. And we wish you all the best and the organisation, particularly in relation to the disaster recovery work that you are doing at the moment.
Thanks so much, Terry. It's been great to chat.
And I know the FRRR, as I said, is in issue 162 of Outback Magazine, but it's often in Outback Magazine. So, you really just have to subscribe to really, keep up with all those stories. A little plug there for us, and hopefully a little plug there for you too, Natalie.
Beautiful magazine. We are avid subscribers.
Great. Thank you. Say that again. No, I'm just kidding. Thanks again, and all the best with that really important work that you are doing.
Many thanks.